Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich and I'm back today with Myles Allan. Thank you very much, Myles, for your time.
Yeah, great to be here.
So Myles is the founder of a company called Mosaic Financial Services Infrastructure, which is a company with about 80 staff, does consulting to the insurance, financial services, managed funds industry, and a really growing and successful business. Has been growing over the last 14 years, has an advisory board now for the last few years. Background is an analyst, project manager type work, and then took the big leap and ended up growing quite a very successful consulting firm. So thank you very much again for your time, Myles.
Pleasure.
And as we've talked about before, your experience with governance has kind of been from the side of leading a company and establishing this advisory board. And the importance and the value of that advisory board is what it brings to you as not just as a managing director of a company, so as the person who owns the business and gets all the ultimate decision-making power. You wouldn't have a board if it didn't have any value for you.
Absolutely.
So the topic we wanted to talk about today was diversity in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
You might think it's kind of funny to have two white guys talking about diversity, and I think it'll be a really interesting conversation off the back of that, because when research happens around diversity in New Zealand in particular, they tend to measure male representation and female representation, which is a very narrow definition of diversity. It has to be a lot more than that. So when we're talking about diversity in the boardroom, what does it we actually mean?
Yeah, really good question, and I think that question could be applied more broadly to our entire industry. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. We got in most of our events there is a drive to get the gender split right, and even that's a bit fraught. So whilst you want the diversity of thought, and diversity of gender and race will give you some of that, but you also got to look at people's backgrounds. So if we had taken our board exclusively from the leafy suburbs in Auckland, that would probably give us an element of groupthink which would be a whole lot less useful than what we have. So we've got different nationalities, different genders, different backgrounds. We've got people who grew up in an urban environment. We've got people from a farming background, which is myself included. And that tends to bring some different perspectives that are particularly useful.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we tend to measure, when we're looking at diversity, differences that we can see, ethnicity and gender, and they're really just proxies for the kind of diversity you actually want, which is the diversity of thought, the diversity of experience and background that leads to a diversity of ideas and different ways of approaching problems, right?
Yep. Now, one of the people I learnt the most from was white Caucasian male, my age, but he'd come from a grocery background into a financial services background and had a completely different way of thinking about things.
Yes.
And in financial services, we tend to see ourselves as somehow dealing in this rarefied, highly complex world no one else can understand. And he came in and had a look at it and went, why are you doing all this stuff? In terms of being able to look at a business process and go, it's broken here, here and here, why are you doing this? And he ruffled a lot of feathers, but he was right. And perhaps the way he communicated his level of rightness could perhaps have been tweaked a wee bit. It was a real eye-opener for me in terms of go beyond appearance and look at the way people approach things and the way they think about problem solving is absolutely critical.
I've had a similar experience in my role at Partners Life. I talk to a lot of financial advice provider business owners, and I'll talk to them about this journey of governance, because a lot of them will be small businesses with half a dozen staff. And they'll say, I talked to somebody, I work with a mentor, but he's not from financial services, or she's not from financial services. And I say, well, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Because as you say, they don't have the same biases. They don't have the same thought of, we've always done it this way.
Yep.
And I think the thing that's really important with bringing those people into your governance process is giving them encouragement to ask what feels like the stupid questions. Because it's often inside those stupid questions that if you stop and think about those questions when they're asked, you think, why do we do it like that? Actually, we don't have to do it this way. Maybe there is a bit, what do you think? And so you really pull those things apart, right? And you come up with much better solutions from outside the industry quite often than in.
Yeah, no, totally.
Right. So when it comes to all these things we're talking about in terms of diversity, we've alluded to this a little bit. I just want to make sure that we have a clear answer. What is the most important element of diversity that creates good decisions in the boardroom?
I think, in a Mosaic context, it's certainly the different ways of thinking about things. And it's down to background. There's a wee bit of culture over the top of that as well.
Yes.
But it's the different approaches to problem solving. And again, across our board, we have a variance in risk appetite, and that is incredibly important as well. So you're looking for the balance, I think.
Right.
So that's pretty critical. And again, these are not outwardly observable things, but they may be integral within ethnicity, background, all those kind of things.
So the diversity of thought is the main objective, and all of these other things drive diversity of thought. Ethnicity, gender, career background, industry experience, all of those things together derive that difference.
Absolutely, but I think if we're talking about the role modelling and the whole gender and ethnicity being demonstrated as being no barrier to governance, that is important as well. But if you're looking at the outputs from the board and the way it functions, the diversity of thought, if that makes sense,
yes.
The more specific requirement on the day is the diversity of thought is the thing we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So what difference does that diversity of thought make in the boardroom? So, we've established that diversity of thought is this key panacea that we seek. And you might have half a dozen, 7, 3, 4, depending on the size of the board, people around the table. You want different ways of thinking, different risk appetites, as you've said. How does that manifest itself in the board discussions and the conversations and the decisions?
So, and I think it's an interesting one to answer. So diversity of thought means diversity of viewpoint, and again comes back to the risk aversion or otherwise. Some people with more of a if you're coming from a financial background, numbers are more important. If you come from more of a marketing background, brand is incredibly important, and of course those two things intersect. So I'm thinking about...
Hammer, everything looks like a nail?
Yeah. So, it's a really interesting one. So what I'm looking for in the functioning of my advisory board are those different viewpoints. And it's all very well having those viewpoints, but what you don't want is a group of people who are then going to sit around the table and agree with each other. You want a robust conversation about... And the way... If I look at the way the market's changing at the moment, different people will have different perceptions of why that's happening.
Yes.
And the why leads you to the what do I do about it. So we're looking for robust, comprehensive solutions, and I think your diversity of thought will lead you to that better than... I think it's one of those, and I've got to be a little bit careful here, if you look at traditional governance going back a couple of decades in the New Zealand context, you do get the sense that there's a lot of people with a similar approach sitting around the table, and the level of disagreement may not be as high as it might.
Yes.
And maybe that's a function of corridor conversations and the pre-positioning of board papers, etc. But then why have the board if it's just a rubber stamping exercise?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So having that diversity of viewpoint leads to a topic being brought before the board, and people giving everyone will have their preconceived ideas of what they think the business should do as a result of that problem, and the different viewpoints will lead to a strong debate around different possible solutions.
Absolutely.
And then you reach a strong, better outcome because different risks have been considered, different possibilities have been considered, so you end up with a much stronger result.
And again, it talks to what we try and do as a consulting firm. So we're trying to bring experience our customers don't have into play and bring insights they don't have. So you're always asking those, have you considered what about set of questions? And that applies to a board as much as it does to the consulting work we do. So if we all already know a narrow, that's our experience, then we're just going to reach a fairly narrow conclusion.
Right.
So, yeah.
Have you got an example that you can share of when that diversity has led to a really strong outcome?
This is where I should have done preparation. So I'm going to have to skirt around this a little bit.
Of course, a lot of this is going to be confidential. You won't want to share.
It's generally in response to the market conditions. So, as everyone in financial services realises, particularly when you're talking about the banking industry, it operates in cycles of expansion and contraction.
Right.
And this was actually, we needed a strong outcome around the contraction we're seeing at the moment. What does it mean? And there's a difference between a cyclical contraction and a paradigm shift.
Yes.
And that was the question, the motion that was put to the board.
Is it cyclical or is it paradigm?
Yeah. Has our market fundamentally shifted away from a particular set of service lines?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the answer is, if that's a yes, we need to drop those service lines and work out where we're going to get the revenue from. Or if it's cyclical, then there's a different set of behaviours and responses to that.
Right.
And that was board meeting before last, I don't know, it was actually back in October. And as an owner of the business, I was driving my board pretty hard to get a response to that. And that was probably the thing we spent most of the time talking about. So what you're doing then is you're leveraging your more senior members' experience in the industry. You're leveraging your advisory board members' view of technology and how that's likely to be applied.
Yes.
As you may know, Nicole Buson's a technologist. She doesn't come from financial services necessarily, so her view on that is particularly valuable. And everybody else has got a different experience, and we've got a number of people who've spent a lot of their career offshore, so you're bringing those perspectives. Mm-hmm. So I think we got to a point where we got a good outcome.
Great.
And very robust discussion. So again, coming back to the whole corridor conversation in perhaps a more traditional, larger institution, there would be absolutely no value in reaching a conclusion beforehand.
Yes.
As CEO, if you're going around, well, can you give me consensus on whether this is cyclical or a paradigm shift? No value whatsoever.
And often it's the points that come out in discussion that are as much value as the conclusion that comes off the back of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, you're coming out of it with a robust discussion that can lead to a part 2 and part 3. When you go away and ruminate and think about what have we not thought about, and if you put a whole AI overlay on this, which we did, and you go, well, we do a lot of business analysis, is that redundant? And the answer we came to after a lot of discussion and a lot of research, and we've unleashed it on our guys to go, well, if you're not using this tool, it's not that, or rather, business analysis is not redundant. Business analysts who don't use AI will be very shortly.
Yes, it's a tool that can very much add to and make more efficient existing skill sets rather than replace them. I'm sure everyone that's done a question on ChatGPT and asked a range of things will find an answer that is blatantly wrong.
Yes.
I ran one through Bard the other day where I was asking around there was a piece of analysis I'd wanted to do for a while and I just hadn't actually got up and done it, and that was if I put $1 away every day from the day someone's born until they turn 65 years old at a flat compound interest rate, what would it be after 65 years? And I threw that question into Bard, and I'm not sure whether it's the way that I asked it. I think it was fairly robust, but it came out with the wrong answer. And I thought, I'm just going to check that. And I did the analysis myself, and the number was quite different. And so you can't just take AI's output and throw that into the mix. You've got to challenge it, right? It's really important.
And as that lawyer in New York will tell you, it doesn't end well.
Yes. Yeah.
So the advice we're giving our guys, there's a whole load of stuff we've worked through in terms of operational, and we're going off topic a little bit, but I think it's an interesting one.
Absolutely.
Operational parameters and there's a number of bullet points around that. Foremost amongst those is don't ask it anything you don't know the answer to.
Yes.
Use it for speed to market, which is what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah.
You've got to validate everything to your point. If you don't, then you end up with egg on your face.
Absolutely.
So, and again, that means if you are a large financial services organisation hell-bent on reducing operational cost, this is not going to get you to that point because you'll still need qualified people with the subject matter expertise to do the thing. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So just coming back to the concept of diversity of thought, one of the things that it brings to mind for me is if you've ever watched any of the work done by Edward de Bono, who wrote Six Thinking Hats, that whole lateral thinking. You look up a couple of YouTube clips, and the way that his mind works, the way that he takes two disparate concepts and brings them in and comes up with a really creative solution off the back of that, really lends itself to this concept of it. It feels like the sort of thing that you get when you get diverse conversation leads to the same sort of thing as I've seen with de Bono, which is just fascinating to watch. So you can absolutely understand the value in that diversity. So just one final question then to finish us off. You've got this experience now with having the governance board with the advisory board rather with Mosaic. What advice would you give to somebody who was starting a career in governance?
That's a tough one. I should have read my list of questions. What advice would I give? Have a think about what your special sauce is and what you're bringing to the table, because that's the thing you should be fronting with. It's the thing that makes you different from, I guess, the other members of whatever advisory structure you're going into, and have a think about the value of that, and particularly for younger members of any governance board, and give it its full value, because you might be surprised at how valuable it is. You're celebrating your own diversity, thinking about what's your superpower,
yes,
and not being afraid to front that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's two really, really good thoughts. So the first one, as you say, is identifying what it is that you bring to the table that's different from everyone that's already there. If you're the same as everyone that's already there, then you're superfluous. And then don't be afraid to speak your mind and ask what feel like stupid questions, because as we've already discussed, they often come out with the best solutions when you challenge the status quo.
And again, I've been, if you're good enough to get to the table, then your view matters. So, I think that's...
Back yourself.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Myles.
Absolute pleasure.
Good chat.
Yeah.
I look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah.
And we'll
Likewise.
see you next episode.